The village of Dallow Creek had been abandoned for so long that even maps pretended it never existed. The desert winds had swallowed its roads, the sun had bleached its rooftops, and the old railway line, once its only lifeline, had rusted into a spine of dead iron stretching through the valley. No one lived here, no one traveled here, and no one had reason to approach the tracks that once carried the Midland Pacific Line, except for the few who claimed they heard something still moving out there at night, long after the last train had derailed and burned in 1952. Elena Parker never wanted to return to this wasteland. She grew up just outside Dallow Creek, in one of the last surviving ranch houses a few miles away. Her mother used to tell her never to follow the sound of the midnight whistle, a phrase she thought was just a cautionary tale for children. But the older she got, the more she realized that the adults in town, what little remained of them, never joked about it. They avoided the tracks the way people avoid open graves, and they never, ever spoke about the night the train came through and didn't stop until it had burned half the village alive. Elena came back not because she wanted to, but because she had no choice. Her younger brother, Luke, had gone missing 24 hours ago. The sheriff found his truck half sunk in sand near the dead rail line. Door open, engine still warm, but no sign of him except footprints leading straight toward Dallow Creek and ending at the tracks. Elena wasn't the type to believe in curses or ghost stories, but she couldn't shake the unease crawling beneath her skin. Something about the way the sheriff had looked at the horizon, pale and distracted, told her there was more to this than a simple disappearance. So she followed Luke's trail into the valley as the sun dropped behind the jagged desert hills. The sky turned bruised purple, then ink black, and the old winter air became so cold it felt like she was breathing glass. She found herself standing on the old tracks, staring down at steel that should have been silent and dead, but it hummed. It vibrated, lightly, just enough for her bones to feel it. Trains don't run here, she told herself. This line is sealed, torn apart, buried under 50 years of dust. And yet the rails shivered beneath her boots. A low sound rolled through the desert, not quite thunder, not wind, something deeper, an approaching rumble that made her heart begin to pound in her throat. Elena stepped back from the tracks instinctively, but the rumble only grew, splitting into layers, clattering metal, the screech of warped wheels, and the unmistakable howl of a train whistle rising from the far end of the valley. No lights, no visible engine, just sound. A train was coming. The desert around her shifted. Air pressure dropped, the cold deepened, and the darkness at the end of the track seemed to twist into something solid, something metallic, something impossibly large and fast. Elena's breath froze in her lungs as a violent wind exploded down the line, sand whipping her face, her hair thrashing behind her. And out of that choking dust, she saw it. A locomotive, gleaming with fire and shadows, barrels of black smoke pouring from a chimney that wasn't connected to anything real. The wheels didn't touch the rails, they hovered inches above it, spinning too fast to be natural. The windows were shattered, and inside, shapes moved, figures sitting upright in their seats, heads twitching toward her, their empty eye sockets glowing like dying coals. The train wasn't fully here. Parts of it flickered, ghosting in and out of existence like a bad signal. But the sound, the scream of metal, the roar of the engine, was too real, too loud, too close. Elena stumbled backward, falling into the dirt. The whistle blew again, this time so piercing she felt the cartilage in her ears bend. Behind the sound she heard something else, voices layered beneath the howl, chanting in broken rhythm, as if they were reciting numbers or counting names. Her name? Luke's? She couldn't tell. The ghost train did not slow. It did not pass through her. It passed around her, splitting the night open as if reality itself made room for it. Wind tore at her jacket. Sparks showered over her like molten rain. The wheels, though suspended in midair, sent vibrations deep through the sand. Through the conductor's window, she saw a figure. Tall, thin, face burned away except for a wide skeletal grin stretching into the shadows of a conductor's hat. It stared directly at her as the train stormed past, then it raised one long blackened hand and pointed down the line. The message was unmistakable. Follow. Just as suddenly as it appeared, the train blinked out, vanishing into the dark with a sound like tearing fabric and a blast of freezing cold air that knocked Elena to her knees. Silence slammed down on the valley so abruptly it made her ears ring. The only sound left was her heartbeat, pounding in sickening rhythm. Elena staggered to her feet, shaking uncontrollably. She didn't believe in ghosts, she didn't believe in curses, but she believed in what she saw. She believed in the terror still gripping every muscle in her body, and she believed in one thing above all else. Luke saw that train too. Maybe he followed it. Maybe he was taken. Either way, Aleda realized she no longer had a choice. The train had shown her the direction. The conductor had pointed. Something wanted her to come deeper into the forgotten village, into the ruins where the tracks disappeared beneath collapsed buildings and swallowed streets. She should run. She should get help. She should do anything except what she was about to do. Elena stepped onto the tracks, and the rails began to hum again.
Alina followed the tracks deeper into the buried remains of Dallow Creek, where the desert had gnawed at the village like a scavenger picking a corpse clean. Houses slouched toward the earth, roofs collapsed inward, shuttered windows staring hollow-eyed at the night. Old storefronts leaned at angles that defied their foundations, wooden beams warped and splintered. Even the air felt wrong, thicker, colder, as if the valley held its breath the moment she crossed into it. Her flashlight cut a narrow cone through the darkness, illuminating drifting dust and the skeletal outlines of buildings half consumed by sand. She passed a rusted metal sign twisted onto its side. Dallow Creek, population 402. Someone had scratched a line through the number and written another beneath it. 0. Wind hissed between the buildings, but beneath it she heard another sound, too faint at first to identify, too rhythmic to be random. It came from the tracks, a distant clacking like train wheels turning over brittle bones. Each click echoed up the iron rails and shivered through her body. She walked faster. The deeper she went, the colder the night grew, until her breath fogged the air in thick white clouds. But the valley was a desert. Temperatures shouldn't drop this low. It felt like stepping into a freezer, like something below the earth was draining the warmth from everything above it. As she crossed an old intersection where two roads met, she saw something ahead that made her heart seize. Footprints. Small ones. Boot prints. A trail half filled with sand but still clear enough to recognize. Luke's. They ran parallel to the tracks until they stopped abruptly near a collapsed depot station. No drag marks, no signs of struggle, just a sudden end. "Luke," she called out, her voice cracking as the sound bounced off ruined buildings. Nothing answered except the wind pushing grains of sand across the rails. She swept her flashlight across the depot's skeletal ruins. The roof had caved in decades ago, leaving only the frame, twisted beams and crumbling brick. Old posters clung to the remaining wall, their images faded beyond recognition. A rusted bench sat broken in half, its metal legs jutting like snapped bones. But something in the shadows shifted. Not an animal. Too tall. Too slow. Elena froze. Her flashlight trembled in her hand as she focused the beam. It landed on a dark figure standing between the collapsed wall and the tracks. At first, she thought it was a mannequin, motionless, stiff, head tilted downward. But then its fingers twitched, long and thin, covered in dark soot. The figure lifted its head. Its face was burned away, skin charred black except for two pale circles where eyes should have been. Its jaw hung loosely, half melted, exposing teeth fused into a permanent smile. It wore a conductor's uniform, the same one she saw on the train. The thing raised one arm slowly, each movement stiff and unnatural, as if its joints had been filled with sand. Its finger pointed down the track, straight toward the heart of the abandoned village. Elena stumbled backward, breath catching in her throat. "Stay away," she shouted, but her voice felt swallowed by the thick, icy air. The conductor's head tilted, the smile stretching impossibly wide. Then, with a jerking motion that reminded her of a puppet pulled by strings, it stepped forward, its feet never touching the ground, hovering an inch above the surface. No footsteps, no sound, just movement, smooth and relentless.
She ducked into the remains of a 2-story building, squeezing through a half-collapsed doorway. Inside, the air stank of mold and old wood. Broken chairs lay scattered across the floor, and a staircase to the right had collapsed into a heap of splinters. She pressed her back against a wall and forced herself to breathe. Silence. Then, clang. Metal on metal. The sound wasn't from the door. It came from the tracks. The conductor was walking on them now, its boots finally touching the rails, striking them like hammers on steel. Clang. 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 Each impact sent a vibration through the building. Alina peeked through a shattered window. The conductor had stopped directly in front of the building she hid in. It stood perfectly still again, one hand resting on the rail, head tilted toward her hiding place. Though it had no eyes, she felt its gaze pierce straight through the walls, through the windows, through her body. Then it stepped off the tracks. Its form flickered, momentarily transparent like a glitch in reality. When it solidified, it was closer, 10 feet away. She ducked behind a collapsed shelf, heart thundering. She couldn't run. The front doorway was too exposed, and the back exit had been buried in sand. She felt trapped, like a rabbit in a snare. The conductor moved again, this time inside the building. But she hadn't heard the door open. It hadn't opened. It had simply appeared inside, like it stepped through the walls. Its head jerked upward, sniffing the air though it lacked a nose. Its mouth opened, revealing blackened gums, and it spoke in a voice that sounded like coal cracking inside a furnace. Passenger found. A cold ripple shot through Elena's spine. She bolted. She leapt over broken furniture and sprinted toward a narrow opening beneath a fallen beam, just enough space to crawl into a neighboring room. The conductor swung its head toward her, neck cracking audibly, and emitted a sound between a whistle and a scream. Elena dove, dragging herself under the beam as splinters scraped her stomach. She rolled into the next room and slammed her back against the wall. Her hands shook so violently she nearly dropped the flashlight. From the other room came the sound of something dragging along wood. Not feet. Hands. The conductor was crawling on all fours now, scraping its way toward the opening, its limbs bending at unnatural angles. Elena. Her breath froze. That was Luke's voice. Elena, help me. It echoed from the conductor's twisted mouth. She covered her ears. No, stop. Elena, it hurts. She knew that voice. She had heard it her whole life, but she also knew what she saw wasn't Luke. This thing was mimicking him, using his voice like a lure. The conductor's burned face pushed under the beam, its jaw unhinging as if trying to force a smile wider. Elena. She scrambled to her feet and smashed through the back wall, wood splintering under her shoulder. She stumbled out onto a narrow alley behind the building, gasping as icy air bit her lungs. She didn't look back. She ran until the ghostly scraping faded and the rails reappeared beside her, leading deeper into the forgotten heart of Dallow Creek. The conductor hadn't chased her into the alley. It had returned to the rails, standing perfectly still again, its hand resting lightly on the metal, waiting for her next step. The train had chosen her path, whether she wanted it or not. The morning after the first ghostly sighting arrived like something reluctant, light slipping into Keshapur as if afraid to touch the place. Mist pooled around the fields, swallowing the distant tree line, and the silence felt thicker than sleep. Arun stepped outside his uncle's house, startled by how cold the ground felt beneath his sandals. It was the kind of cold that did not belong to early morning. It was the kind that belonged to graveyards. He tied his scarf tighter around his neck and glanced toward the place where the old railway line used to be, buried under 30 years of soil and weeds. He expected to see only scrub grass and rusted stone markers, but instead, a line of gleaming steel cut across the land like a surgical wound. Arun froze. The railway tracks, once dismantled, removed, forgotten, were back,
and they looked new. Not just new, polished, as though 1,000 wheels had passed over them during the night. The villagers had told him stories. Yes, they had mumbled about noises, lights, rumbling ground, but Arun had assumed embellishment, exaggeration, the way all remote villages clung to myth because it was more comforting than truth. But standing there now, heart stuttering in his chest, he realized something horrifying. The ghost train wasn't just passing through memory, it was carving its path back into reality. Arun stepped toward the shining tracks, his breath forming thin, trembling fog. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if something beneath the soil pulled at him, like the earth itself was warning him not to continue. The rails hummed, a faint vibration, so subtle he wondered if it was only in his imagination. But when he knelt and pressed his palm onto the cold metal, a shock of sensation shot up his arm. The track was warm, like a living thing. He jerked his hand back, stumbling onto the dirt. His vision blurred for a second, and he felt a sudden crushing weight behind his eyes, like someone pressing their fingers into his skull from the inside. And then he heard footsteps, slow, shuffling, coming from behind him. Arun turned. An elderly woman, bent and thin as a twig, stood only a few feet away. Her eyes, milky with age, stared directly at him, but there was something else in them, something sharp, knowing, afraid. "You touched it," she whispered, her voice cracking like brittle leaves. "You shouldn't have touched it." Arun swallowed hard. "Ma, the tracks, they weren't here yesterday. Who built them?" "No one built them. No one living." Her gaze drifted toward the horizon, where the fog thickened like rising smoke. "At first, the tracks return. Then, the passengers follow." Arun felt something crawl down his spine. "Passengers?" She nodded once, so slowly the motion looked painful. "They walk before the train arrives." Before he could ask anything else, she lifted her hand and pointed behind him. Arun turned again, and this time he saw them. Figures standing along the track. Dozens, maybe more. The fog swirled around them, revealing only outlines, some tall, some hunched, some with faces half visible, and others entirely obscured, as if the mist itself tried to hide them. Their clothes were old-fashioned, almost colonial era, torn in places, stained in ways Arun did not want to identify. But instead, the worst part was their stillness. They didn't sway. They didn't breathe. They simply stood there, lined up along the tracks, facing the direction the train would come from, like passengers waiting for a morning commute. A wave of nausea rolled through Arun. Who are they? The old woman's breath quivered. The ones who died when the train crashed. The ones whose bodies were never recovered. The ones who never reached home. She leaned closer, her voice a harsh whisper. And the ones who refuse to accept their dead. Arun's throat tightened. This isn't possible. Everything here is possible. In Keshapur, time is broken. The past leaks through, and when the ghost train comes, it takes more than it brings. Arun stared at the silent passengers, unable to move. One of the figures, the closest, shifted its head slightly, just enough for Arun to see its face, or what remained of it. The left side was intact, an ordinary man's eye, an ordinary cheek, but the right side, it wasn't eaten by decay, it wasn't torn by trauma. It was something much worse. It was blurred, as if someone took an eraser to his features but left behind smudges of motion. His jaw flickered between being open and closed. His eye glitched like a repeated frame of a broken film reel. Arun gasped and stumbled backward. The old woman grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "Don't draw their attention. If they look at you, they will follow you long after sunrise." Arun tore his gaze away from the shape. What do they want? To continue their journey, to board the train. But the train isn't real. She shook her head. It is real enough to kill you." A sudden gust of wind swept through the village, stirring the dust, bending the dry grass. The passengers did not move, but the tracks beneath their feet trembled again, this time stronger, more insistent. Arun felt it in his bones. He hesitated, then forced himself to ask, "Why is the train coming back now, after decades?" The old woman's lips pressed tightly together. She looked as though she did not want to answer, but eventually she did. "You know the story of the crash. Everyone knows it, but not everyone knows how the crash happened." Arun frowned. "Everyone says the driver fell asleep, or the brakes failed, or—" "No," her voice cut through him like a blade. "The crash happened because the train tried to stop for something on the tracks." Arun's skin prickled. "What?" "Someone," she corrected softly. The fog around the passengers thickened. For a moment, Arun thought he saw another figure appear at the far end, smaller, thinner, dressed in something white. But before he could be certain, the shape vanished. The driver pulled the emergency brake. Witnesses said he was screaming before the train collided with the bend, screaming a name. "A name?" She nodded. "Your family name." Arun's heartbeat staggered. "My family?" He screamed for someone he recognized, someone who shouldn't have been there, someone who died long before the train ever ran through this land. Arun stared at her, unable to speak. "It is blood calling blood," she said. "That's why you are here now. The train remembers your lineage. It remembers the one who stood on the tracks that night, the one who started all of this." Arun took a step back. "What are you saying?" The old woman's expression crumpled with sorrow. "The ghost train isn't just returning to the village, it is returning for you." A sound rose in the distance, a low metallic moan, like steel dragging against stone. Arun's heart clenched. He turned toward the horizon. The fog parted. A single headlight flickered in the distance, far too bright, far too high, far too slow. The ground vibrated. The passengers lifted their heads in unison, and the old woman whispered the words Arun would never forget. "It hears you." The headlight grew larger, brighter, and impossibly slow, as though the train was pushing through something heavier than fog, something with weight and memory. The old woman clutched Arun's arm with her trembling hand, but her grip was iron, her bones stiff with dread. "Do not run," she whispered. "It sees movement." Arun's chest tightened. "What does that mean?" "It hunts what it remembers," she said, "and it remembers those who do not stay still." The ground vibrated again, deeper, more resonant, as if the soil wasn't merely shaking but calling. The villagers had talked about tremors before the ghost train appeared, but they never mentioned how the earth felt like it was breathing, rising and falling in slow, agonizing waves, as though something enormous slept beneath it. And that enormous thing was waking up. The spectral passengers lining the tracks stood taller now, their heads lifted at once, their bodies aligning as if responding to a silent conductor. Their vague, blurred faces seemed to sharpen, not becoming clearer, but becoming interested, like prey sensing the hunter. The distant whistle pierced the silence. Long, drawn out, a note filled with grief. A second whistle followed, quicker, sharper, almost urgent. The old woman's eyes widened. "It's calling for him." Arun's blood ran cold. "For who?" She looked at him as though the answer should be obvious. "For you." Arun suddenly felt every nerve in his body tense. Fear spread through him like a toxin, tightening his muscles, hollowing his breath. He stepped backward, unable to help himself. Instantly, half the ghostly passengers turned their heads toward him. Their movements were stiff, mechanical, like puppets tugged by unseen strings. The old woman hissed, "Still, stay still." Arun froze. The passengers' heads slowly tilted back into their original position, facing the approaching light. The train sound grew louder, wheels grinding, metals shrieking, but the tracks in front of him were perfectly silent, glowing faintly with the heat of something that wasn't natural. Arun stared at them, swallowing hard. "You said the train remembers my family. Who was on the tracks that night?" The old woman hesitated, her lips trembled, her eyes darted away as if looking at Arun too long hurt her. "Before you were born, before your mother even lived here, your grandfather had a brother, a child, a little boy." Arun felt a chill settle in his stomach. "He drowned in the river, or so your family claimed." Arun frowned. "Claimed?" "There was no body," she said softly. "No witness, only a scream in the night. Your great-grandfather found torn pieces of the boy's kurta near the river. The villagers said it was an animal attack." Her voice dropped lower. "But your great-grandfather never believed that. He searched for days, weeks, until the night he claimed he saw the child standing on the old tracks, pale, dripping, silent, staring." Arun's breaths came out shallow. "That's not possible." "Nothing about this place is possible," she whispered. "That child, your lost relative, he was the first soul ever seen on these tracks, before the train, before the railway was built, before Keshapur even had a station." Arun's heart hammered. Why was he there? She shook her head slowly. "Some say he wandered into a crossing between worlds. Some say the village sits on a boundary where time loops. Others say the child died in such a violent, such a lonely way that his spirit never left, and the train that came later attached itself to him." "Attached?" Arun asked, swallowing hard. The old woman nodded. "Every ghost train has a heart, a core, something that anchors it. For some, it's the passengers, for others, the driver, but for this one," her voice trembled, "it is a child." Arun felt the ground quiver beneath him again. The train light brightened. Now he could make out the faint outline of a front grille, twisted metal, steam swirling unnaturally backward, defying physics. Shadows clung to the moving mass, flickering like trapped creatures trying to escape. "And that enormous thing is tied to your blood." A metallic screech ripped through the air as the train approached another bend far in the distance. The rails in front of Arun began to glow red hot. The fog thickened around the passengers, shivering like a living organism. Then something happened that made Arun's mind crack around the edges. A small figure stepped onto the track, right in front of the line of ghostly passengers. A boy, maybe 8 years old, barefoot, soaked, his dripping hair plastered to his skull. His arms dangled at his sides. His head was tilted as if listening to the distant train. Arun's breath caught. "Is that him?" Arun asked, voice shaking. The old woman made a sound like choking on her own breath. "Do not let him see you." But the child was already turning. Slowly, mechanically. The drip of water from his fingertips echoed strangely, too loud, too heavy. When he lifted his face fully toward Arun, the world tilted. The boy had no eyes. Only 2 dark cavities filled with black water that spilled down his cheeks in slow trails. The boy opened his mouth and water bubbled out, spilling over his chin, hitting the tracks with sizzling heat. "Arun!" The voice was not a child's. It was layered, deep, distorted, as though echoing from underwater. Arun staggered backward, his vision spinning. The old woman's grip clamped onto his hand. "Look away! Look away!" But he couldn't. His body refused to obey. The boy stepped off the track, moving toward him. Each step left wet footprints that hissed against the earth. The ghostly passengers did not react. They remained still, staring forward, awaiting the train. But the child, this drowned apparition, was coming directly for Arun. The air chilled suddenly. Frost crawled up Arun's arms like veins of ice. His breath came out in clouds. The boy reached out a small, dripping hand. "You came back." Arun choked. "I wasn't even born." "You left me," the voice growled, layered and broken. The old woman yanked Arun's arm, pulling him behind her. "You are not the one he seeks. He is confused by the blood. The ghost train binds him, twists him. The boy's head twitched sharply. Then again, too fast. A glitching motion, unnatural, like a corrupted memory trying to take form. Arun felt the urge to vomit. Then the whistle screamed again, closer now, shaking the very sky. The child's head snapped back toward the tracks. He froze. The old woman shoved Arun behind a tree. Do not let him touch you. If he touches you, the train takes you in his place. Arun pressed his back against the trunk, lungs burning, heart thunderous. The ghost train screeching grew louder, so loud Arun felt his teeth vibrate. Sparks flew along the reformed tracks miles away. The light swelled, pulsing like a massive heartbeat. The child stood completely still. Then, he turned away from Arun, and he smiled. A terrible, waterlogged smile that stretched too wide and revealed teeth that looked like cracked stones. "He knows you're here," the boy whispered, not turning around. "He's coming faster." Arun felt something cold slide down his spine. The old woman whispered, "The conductor. He knows Arun's bloodline. He seeks to finish the journey that was interrupted." The train emerging through the fog made Arun's knees buckle. It wasn't just a train. It was a carcass of metal and shadow, dragged through time, burning with cold fire. Its windows glowed with silhouettes, passengers pressed against the glass, screaming without sound. The front was twisted, crumpled, dripping embers of white-hot sparks. And yet it moved steadily, powerfully, hungering. The child stepped directly onto the glowing rails. He lifted his arms. His body began to distort, stretching, warping, bending backward at an impossible angle, as if the train's energy was rewinding him, unmaking him. "Don't watch," the old woman hissed. "If you see the moment the child dies again, the train will claim a replacement." Arun squeezed his eyes shut, but he could still hear it. The bend of bones, the screech of metal twisting, the roar of something enormous rushing past. The ghost train screamed toward the boy. The ground jolted with the impact. A sound tore out of the fog, a child's horror-filled wail overlapping with the grinding metal roar. Then, silence. For a heartbeat. 2. 3. Arun opened his eyes. The boy was gone. The passengers had vanished. The tracks lay empty. And the ghost train was slowing, stopping, right in front of him. Steam poured off its corpse-like form. A shadow stepped out from the front cabin. Tall, human-shaped, wearing a torn conductor's coat soaked with old soot and darker stains. Its face was hidden in shadow, but it lifted a gloved hand and pointed directly at Arun. The old woman gasped. "He has chosen you."
The conductor did not move. He simply stood there at the foot of the train steps, a tall and impossibly rigid silhouette outlined by dead bluish light. Steam curled around his boots like living smoke, tendrils that slithered toward Arun as if dragging themselves on hands and knees. Arun's legs trembled so violently he felt he might collapse. The old woman clutched him, harder than she ever had, her fingers digging into his wrist. "Do not speak," she whispered. "Do not step forward. Do not acknowledge him." The conductor lowered his pointing hand. Then he tapped the side of the train. Once, twice, 3 times. Each tap echoed not like metal being struck, but like knuckles tapping hollow wood from inside a coffin. The old woman froze, horror filling her eyes. "He's invoking invitation." Arun swallowed. "What does that mean?" "It means," she trembled, "he has offered you passage, and if you refuse incorrectly, he will take you by force." The conductor stepped down from the train. His boots landed without a sound.
though the ground trembled under him. He walked with an unnatural smoothness, as though dragged forward by strings. His coat swayed behind him, shredded at the bottom, revealing scraps of dry, brittle flesh sticking to his collar, like something embalmed long ago. Fog thickened around him, dense, suffocating, colder than ice. The old woman leaned close. "Do not look into his face." Arun tried to nod, but he felt something pulling his jaw upward, as if an invisible fingertip pushed beneath his jaw. He clenched his eyes shut before his gaze could rise. Step, step, step. The conductor stopped directly in front of him. Arun could sense him, like standing next to a generator made from bones and memory. The air vibrated. The dirt beneath Arun's shoes pulsed like a heartbeat. A voice slid through the fog. It was not spoken. It was placed inside Arun's mind. "You returned." The old woman gasped. No, he speaks only to blood. He knows who you are." Arun shook. I don't know what you want." Another whisper invaded his skull, wet, cold, stretching across the inside of his mind like a hand made of shadow. "A promise cannot die." Arun's pulse hammered. "I don't understand." The conductor leaned closer. Arun could feel the shape of a face inches from him, though he couldn't see it, just heatless breath sliding across his cheek, colder than river water in winter. Blood remembers. Arun's lungs seized. A hand, gloved, stiff, cold as stone, touched his shoulder. His vision burst with static. For a split second, a memory that was not his flashed in front of him. A boy, small, soaked, terrified, running along tracks in the dark. A lantern swinging wildly. A man shouting behind him. A scream cut short. A blinding white light. And the crushing weight of iron. Arun jerked back, gasping, nearly collapsing. The old woman caught him. "Don't let him take you," she cried. "Fight it." But Arun felt weak, drained, as if the memory had sucked part of his soul out. The conductor straightened, tilting his head slightly at Arun's resistance. Then he extended his arm toward the open door of the ghost train. Inside the doorway, shadows twitched like restless passengers pacing in cramped corridors. The old woman stepped between Arun and the conductor, raising her shaking arms. "You cannot have him," she cried. "His ancestor broke the pact, yes, but the boy you took was not his to pay for." The conductor did not react. Instead, his head rotated, not turned, rotated, grinding slowly, impossibly, until he seemed to face her without moving his shoulders. Arun felt nausea rise in his throat. Fog coiled around the old woman's ankles. "No," she gasped, trying to step back. The fog held her, lifted her, dragged her closer to the train steps. Her nail fingers dug into the ground as she screamed, clawing the dirt. "Arun, run! If it takes me, go!" Arun lunged forward, grabbing her hand, trying to pull her back, but the fog wrapped around his wrist too. Cold like needles stabbed under his skin. He yanked free, stumbling. "No, I'm not leaving you." The conductor's shadow shifted, stretching longer, darker, swallowing the ground around the woman. Her scream fractured into jagged breaths. Her body jerked as if invisible hooks pulled her spine upward. She was being lifted toward the train door. "Arun, listen," she choked. "If he takes you, if you step on that train, you will not remain human. You will become part of the line, part of the cycle. You will join the dead who walk the rails for eternity." The conductor raised his hand. The woman's mouth opened in a silent scream, and then she vanished into the carriage, swallowed by darkness. The train door slammed shut. Arun staggered backward, trembling violently, tears blurring his vision. No, come back. Please. The conductor lowered his hand again and turned toward Arun. This gesture meant one thing. Your turn. Arun's heart pounded. His mind raced. He couldn't fight this thing. He couldn't outrun it. He couldn't stop a ghost train powered by grief, memory, and ancient tragedy. But then, something clicked in his mind. Something the old woman had said. The boy, the ghost child, the anchor. If the child was bound to Arun's bloodline, then maybe the train was too. Arun took a staggered breath. If I go with you, will you stop coming here? Will you stop haunting this village? The conductor's head tilted, not forward, to the side, like a curious predator. Arun straightened slightly. If this started with my family, so end it with me. Silence. Fog hushed. Even the insects in the trees seemed to stop breathing. Then, the conductor lowered his extended arm. Arun felt a cold rush of dread, because this wasn't acceptance. This was approval. The conductor turned slightly, motioning toward the train door that had swallowed the old woman. The shadows inside flickered, faces pressed against the glass, faces that moved with unnatural smoothness, stretching too far, melting across the glass. Arun stepped toward the train. One step. Another. His legs shook. His breath came in shallow gasps. Every instinct screamed at him to run. But the village, the boy, the curse, it had to end. He reached the steps. The metal burned cold through his shoes. He grabbed the rail. The world dimmed, colors fading, warmth vanishing, sound growing distant. He climbed. One step, 2 steps. Then a small hand grabbed his ankle. Arun froze. The ghost child stood below him, eyes still hollow, water dripping from his empty sockets. But now, he looked almost human, almost pleading. Don't, the child whispered. Don't go. Arun's breath shook. If I don't, this never ends. The boy's head twitched. He lied. Arun stopped breathing. The boy pointed a trembling finger at the conductor. He wants a replacement. Someone alive. Someone strong. Someone with blood. He keeps the cycle going. Arun's heartbeat slowed. That's why he chose you, because you're not dead. The conductor turned sharply. Steam burst from the train. The lights flickered violently. The child backed away, terrified. Run, the boy begged. Before he seals the door, run. The conductor lunged. Arun jolted backward off the steps just as the door slammed shut with an explosive clap. The conductor's gloved hand reached through the gap, but the ghost child grabbed Arun's arm and pulled him hard. The hand missed. The train screamed, not a whistle, not metal, but a horrifying human-like shriek of fury as it lurched forward. Fog spun violently, sparks sprayed off the tracks. The ghost train tore itself backward into the night, dragging shadows, screams, and burning fog with it, until it vanished between the trees. The ground quieted, the fog thinned, the rails faded into dust. Arun collapsed, shaking violently. The ghost child knelt beside him. He'll return, until his last passenger joins him. Arun stared at the boy. Then how do I stop him? The child pointed to Arun's chest. In your blood is the answer he fears. Arun swallowed. What does that mean? The child began dissolving, slowly, like water draining into soil. His last whisper drifted through the trees. Find the one who broke the pact before he finds you. Then the child was gone, and Arun sat alone in the quiet forest, realizing the ghost train had not ended. It had only begun hunting him.